There is no yin without yang. Many Americans are familiar with the Chinese religious concept of yin and yang, the balance of light and dark. Lisa Metzger, a doctor in alternative medicine, explains yin and yang are clearly opposite, but they also cannot exist without each other. They are in a constant state of adjusting balance, and they actually change into each other. Nabokov, famous for works such as Lolita, explores the idea of balance in his short story Christmas. Although originally published in a Russian magazine in 1925, Christmas was not translated into English until 1985. Nevertheless, its themes remain prevalent in modern society. Nabokov explores a single day in the life of a grieving father, haunted by the death of his son. Upon the realization that it's Christmas, the man, Slepstov, decides to kill himself. At that moment, a moth cocoon, collected by his son months prior, miraculously hatches. In his short story Christmas, Vladimir Nabokov uses a father's suicidal grief to explore the cyclical nature of life and death and convey the idea that the world must exist in a state of balance. Nabokov establishes the cycle of life and death using vivid imagery. The story begins with a harsh, biting tone. Bitterly, angrily, Slepstov pushed the thick, fluffy snow covering off the parapet. Even though the author uses words like fluffy, which typically have a positive connotation, they are tainted with Slepstov's bitterness. The world around him is painted dead and lackluster. This shifts as Slepstov remembers the scenery when his son was alive, in the summertime. He recalls, his son laughs under the turned-down brim of a straw hat burned by the sun. His dear, smooth, sun-tanned legs in their serge shorts and soaked sandals assume their cheerful, widespread stance. His son, the literal sun in his life, is described warmly and gently. His memory seamlessly interrupts his current bitter mood. The winter and summer seasons juxtapose one another but keep blending together in Slepstov's mind, mirroring birth and death. However, even birth and death are ironically intertwined. Slepstov remembers his son's hobby, capturing insects. Here, in this room, his son had spread the wings of his captures. He would pin the carefully killed insect in the cork-bottomed groove of the setting board, and fasten down flat with pinned strips of paper the still fresh, soft wing. His son, who represents life and youthfulness, is also capable of gruesome death. The insects are described as fresh and soft, highlighting their liveliness. Even someone as pure as Slepstov's son cannot exist without death, just as Slepstov himself cannot live without remembering the warmth of his son. The seasons, just like life and death, blend into one another and are inextricably linked. Nabokov also utilizes specific language to stress the continuity of life. Before the reader learns the truth about Slepstov's grief, the sentences are lengthy, as if they are a trail of thoughts. Nabokov writes, just recently in Petersburg, after having babbled in his delirium about school, about his bicycle, about some great oriental moth, his son died. And yesterday, Slepstov had taken the coffin, weighed down it seemed with an entire lifetime, to the country, into the family vault near the village church. The reveal of the sentence is only 3 words, yet it weighs down the run-on sentence. This can represent Slepstov's inability to cope with the death of his son. However, it also nods to the perpetual cycle of life. The sentence itself seems never-ending, just like life. Furthermore, death does not stop things from continuing, just like how it does not prevent the sentence from continuing. Although Slepstov's son has died, he is forced to continue on with his own life. This idea continues as Slepstov makes the resolve to kill himself, explaining, "It's Christmas tomorrow and I'm going to die. Of course, it's so simple. This very night, death," Slepstov said softly, as if concluding a long sentence. Once again, death inserts itself in long sentences and within life itself. The preceding sentences are unusually short. Although Nabokov describes Slepstov's statement of death as a conclusion, ironically it is not the conclusion of a sentence. It is placed in the middle of the phrase, creating a longer sentence. This further emphasizes how death does not equate to an end. Life, like sentences, continues on. This theme of death is also placed within Christmas, a Christian holiday that represents the birth of Christ. This run-on sentence shifts from talking about life to death and finally Slepstov's life once again, highlighting the continuation of life and death. Nabokov also uses different word tenses to highlight this idea. The story begins in the past tense, even as Slepstov begins to remember his own son. There was his son walking. This quickly shifts into the present tense, with Nabokov writing, "Now the boy sees his father. Forever lost laughter plays on his face." The shift in tense blurs the line between past and present, between life and death. Ironically, a past event is spoken about in the present. The past is not truly the past, but a continuation of the never-ending cycle of life. Some may argue that Christmas is about hope, but it is ultimately about the balance between hope and despair, reflecting the holiday itself. Christmas is about hope, placed within a time of despair, the middle of winter. The scene of the moth's birth is gory and wet, emphasizing the raw beauty of nature. Furthermore, it is framed as a religious experience, and its wings kept growing and unfolding, and now they were developed to the limit set for them by God. Many will positively interpret this because this is the answer humans want. They want things to be good and happy, but this is not the reality. As the birth of the moth begins, Nabokov writes, "Slepstov opened his eyes." In Russian, the surname Slepstov means blind man. The literal translation of this sentence into English would be, "The blind man opened his eyes." And yet, he is not opening his eyes to just a miracle. He is opening his eyes to the miracle within his hopelessness. If Slepstov were not at rock bottom, the birth of the moth would not be as significant. Like yin and yang, death and life coexist with one another and contrast each other. The birth of the moth is only a miracle and is only impactful to Slepstov because he has yielded himself to death. Moths are known to represent change and transformation, similar to butterflies. The moth itself also mirrors Slepstov, the way yin and yang mirror each other. And then those thick black wings with a glazy eyespot on each took a full breath under the impulse of tender, ravishing, almost human happiness. The moth is a new hope in life, while Slepstov represents death and grief. This mirrors the shift between life and death earlier in the story, and how they are always intertwined. Slepstov does not open his eyes to a miracle, but a miracle within his grief. The reader never gets a clear answer regarding what Slepstov decides, further enforcing the idea that it is not about his final decision, it is about the balance of nature. Within darkness, Slepstov's grief, there is still hope. Afterward, it is up to him and ultimately the reader to decide how to move forward. Vladimir Nabokov's Christmas is an ironic twist on what miracles truly mean. Using a grieving father, he paints the cycles of the seasons, of life, and of death. They are never-ending, but more importantly, they are coexistent. There is a pressure on those grieving to see the silver lining. Even Slepstov's butler encourages him to enjoy Christmas without letting him grieve. However, it is not until he accepts his grief and decides to kill himself that he can see the raw beauty of nature, the birth of the moth. Life is not ever black and white. Rather than subjecting people to polarized thinking, society must accept the darkness within the light and vice versa. The reader does not get a concrete answer on how Slepstov decides to handle this information. He may have killed himself, or he may have moved on. Although death is painful, it can be acknowledged while appreciating the beauty of life. And although children are wonderful, it is acceptable to be sad at their growing up. Within grief, it is important to remember this fact. There is still beauty in life within the world. There are things to live for. Life and death are a painted cycle. Light flows into dark and dark into light, with a glazy eyespot contrasting each. Life and death are the embodiment of yin and yang. There cannot be one without the other.